Hey everyone, this is Scott and Chris. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Union Podcast. How's it going, Chris?
It's going good.
You got the lumberjack look going today,
I am. Can you tell it turned a little bit cold in Dallas? It hasn't frozen, but it seems like winter here.
yeah. Well, cold in Dallas is not cold to everybody else, so they make fun of us for that. But we can stand the heat.
Yep.
So we are going to talk about some prompting guides that we found. We found 3 different prompting guides, and we're just going to discuss a little bit about, what's in them, who they're for, how do you use it, and maybe what's best for you based on, your specific situation. If you're looking at how to use generative AI a little bit better in your personal and work life, right?
Yep.
So Chris, we found the Microsoft prompting guide, which is it's inside Azure, right? Is it
Yes.
as Open AI and Azure specific?
Yeah.
And then the Open AI has a platform API guide, and
Yep.
then Google put out like a Gemini prompting guide.
Yeah.
Um, from from your perspective, let's start with the Microsoft one. Like, tell me who it's geared for. I read through it. It's not. I actually thought there'd be more documentation than there was. I didn't double click in it
Yeah.
too deep. But like, who's it for and what's in it?
Well, what's interesting is it actually says it assumes a technical audience with some familiarity, easy for me to say, with prompting engineering and few shot training, which, okay, all of a sudden is like a mere mortal is not going to understand what a few shot training is, less the complexities of prompt engineering.
Yeah,
So
what's few shot training?
it has to do with giving examples of to say train the model of what you want to talk about. So a normal LLM has, say, read the internet for its corpus. So it knows, like when it sees Humpty Dumpty sat on a, well, it's read a wall as the correct thing to respond. It could say a chair, but it knows contextually to complete that there. So few shot training is if you want to say, use it to categorize something like, tell me if this is a complaint or say a product return, and then here are examples of what product returns are. So you're actually giving it the kind of training of what to look for when you're doing it. And that's a pretty complex thing. I mean, that's something that, say, when you and Jeff had like a webinar, what, year and a half, 2 years ago about the rise of the prompt engineer, it would be that level of complexity. But kudos to them for actually stating at the beginning, this is not for mere mortals. This is a very technical guide. And these are the things you need to understand to be able to use it.
All right, so not for the regular business user. We get a lot of questions like, "Oh, this AI thing is cool. Generative AI is what they mean." They're like, "How can I use it?" Right? So it's not for that person.
No,
Uh,
no, for sure not.
because they're looking for use cases. It's more. Would you think it is developer centric, or maybe solution engineer, somebody maybe not as code heavy job, or
No, I think it's going to be someone who's pretty code heavy to be able to implement these things and who are going to be writing an application with it. It's definitely someone I'm going to write an application to embed this inside. So I would say it's squarely a developer style audience.
Okay. And then what kind of application? Any application, or is it more Microsoft Power Automate?
Well, it's in Azure, so you can leverage Azure from, say, the .NET framework, or you could leverage it from your own Java framework, whatever. So it is independent, but it is hosted inside of in Azure itself as an LLM.
Okay. All right. So moving on to the Open AI one, I would imagine that this one is closely aligned with with the developer audience, right? I took a look at it, and my eyes glazed over. I was like, yeah, this is not for me.
Yeah, it is very technical. The fact they start referring to APIs, and then the neat thing is they do tell you how you want a solution, like how, if you're looking for answers with very specific context, you need to write a RAG or retrieval augmented solution. And to get retrieval augmented generated code, you can ask it to start writing some code for you that you can complete out. So it's very developer focused. Like, I'm going to write a custom application and implement inside of it. doesn't go into a lot of prompting as much, but it goes over like the building blocks of how a developer would approach it.
All right. Then remind everybody, what is retrieval augmented generation?
So retrieval augmented generation, we call it document understanding in Krista, is basically when you want to get answers to a specific question, but not based on what's say on the corpus or what's trained on the internet. Say it's a customer service and you want answers based on your return policies, or it's accounts payable, receivable, and you have specific business rules and finance to apply to those two processes, and you want your answers to be your company's information, not something that just makes up or hallucinates off the internet, which would be a reasonable answer, just not maybe the right answer for your company. So it's how you get your company's data into it in a very practical way.
Yeah, and that's very different than when people ask us about training their own model, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
And so it,
training your own model is like cost and resource prohibitive. Like you're not going to do that.
oh, yeah. And plus, if you don't know what you're doing, you can actually mess up the neural network and it get really random answers for sure.
Yeah, I've messed up my neural network over the weekend before. All right, so again, very developer centric. You're building solutions to support some like business case, business workflow, and yeah, I remember talking with Jeff about the prompt engineer because I think one of the first job postings that we found, I mean, it was at least last year, and it got really popular because they were advertising that this job was a $900,000 per year job for prompt engineering, and it is, I mean, it's a skill, right? It's and hopefully the solutions now don't require that much skill, right? Because they're just getting better and better.
Well, the interesting thing is you say it's a skill, but actually, like Azure's does say there's a lot of art and science in this. So it's not like learning how a SQL statement works. This is the pattern. This is what happens in the databases. This is how the indexes work. It's actually, there's quite a bit of art in understanding the tone, the ordering of the information you give it, and how to do the prompt. And that's probably the difference between the Google one and these others. They actually dived into like, here's a pattern or a recipe to follow to get you on the right path. Now there is still some art, it can vary. And they had a really nice blue paragraph about that. Your mileage may vary, check for accuracy. But yeah, it's still not something you can just master by reading a book.
Yeah. All right. So we'll move on to the Google one. It is much more a like business user specific document, right?
Yes.
Because it does give a bunch of examples. I mean, it has like persona examples, right? If you're this person, use this prompt, and I'm scrolling through the doc here to figure out where the table of contents was. But like if you're an admin, if you're in PR, marketing, management, HR, executives, it gives you all these prompts. But what I thought was interesting is it tells you like how to do it, and it reminds you and like, hey, you have to tell this thing who you are and what you want, and provide it the right context and the data, and then explain the outputs. Right? That's a lot of work.
Yeah. So they actually give you like a recipe, if you will. And I thought it was first time I saw this, like, oh, it's like when I was in high school and had to learn how to write a 5-paragraph essay. It's like you need to provide the persona, you need to provide a task, and you need to provide the content, support the task completion, and then the format of the response back. So and we know that the ordering of those things does make a difference. The tone in which you talk to them is different. And so they said, and there's Google's, they said, treat this as if you're talking to another person, but don't use slang, which is when you talk to someone else, of course, you're using slang. And
Jargon,
be very,
right? Yeah.
yeah, you're very concise and very specific. So it's like, well, everything you're telling me is not how I would talk to you, Scott. I mean, we wouldn't, it sounds like you're saying act like you're talking to a person, but really use perfect English dialect and do not use slang and explain things, but don't over explain them. So I thought, I was like, well, this is an awkward conversation to begin with, right?
That's like talking to a little kid,
Yeah.
because they're not going to understand, important cues in context. They haven't learned that yet. So
Yeah.
it's like the LLMs, they haven't learned it either until you tell them like the whole backstory, right?
Yep.
It's like when someone is telling you a story and they forget all the details and you can't follow along and there's multiple characters and you're like, okay, who's doing what, right? It doesn't
Yep.
know that either, so you have to provide that each time. And when I was looking through all the different personas, you know, I it was easy to recognize if you read through them all that you're just doing the same thing over and over and over. Hey, I am in PR and I'm trying to do this, and I need the output for this, or schedule an agenda, right? Like,
Yeah. I need a press release, which would give it, the format of press release is probably well known. It's 3 sentences. But no one would write a press release that way because you're going to start with the press release template about who the company is and then what their tagline is, and then have your hook of why this is important to support the company in the tagline. I just thought it was kind of interesting because some of these I was like, I wouldn't actually use generative AI to do that.
yeah.
I mean, I may use it to correct it, but certainly no.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, to use it to correct it, if you create something and then put it into the LLM and ask it to like, hey, improve the readability or improve the hook, or you're giving all of the content, the context, the format, you're providing that instead of kind of going the other way. Because if you start with just the prompt, the output, I would guarantee, okay, I was going to say 100%. I guarantee you 98% of the time that you try this for the first or 20th time, you don't like what you get out of it. It's
Yeah.
just, it's not good, right? Because you don't know how to prompt it. Now you get better over time. Like, I mean, I have prompts that are half a page long.
Mhm.
And it took me multiple, probably hundreds of tries to get it right.
Yeah.
And then they don't work. Then you gotta fix it, right? Because the models
Yeah.
can't.
Well, and the good thing is they do recognize that. And when they talk about Gemini, they say prompting should be iterative. Like, do it, and then if you need to refine it, you can iterate over and over and over. And then, but what I was thought was interesting, like, okay, persona seems pretty easy. Like, who are you? What's your job? What's your title? Things like that. But the tasks to be done, and some of the examples, they were very generic, like create an agenda. Well, well, but is this an agenda for salespeople? Is this an agenda for a board meeting? Is this an agenda, to cover quarterly, customers? What's the thing? And then it was very generic when it created, and then it's do a welcome. Then you had to iterate again. Well, describe a little bit more about what you would do in your welcoming and things like that. So I thought that it's interesting, but like you're kind of aligning to is like getting the content inside the prompt seems like an Achilles heel. And like when I looked at these, many of the prompts were like 31 characters and they got or 31 words and they got a 27 word response. So, and I know there's a thing in the bottom that says like prompts should be over, 20 words, things that are like 7 and 9 words aren't going to work well. They're because you're not giving it all the content and the context.
Yeah. Yeah, they said by looking at the data, I'm reading that right now, um, based on what we learned from our users, the best prompts average 21 words with relevant context. I said, yet the prompts that people actually try are less than 9 words. So they're
Yeah.
basically just like, hey, I want to do this. And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And with Google, they do align to you can put lots of details on the prompt. So like in the customer service example, they said, you know, they it actually told in the prompt is like, I'm a customer service person. I've received an email about broken headphones. I have inspected the picture and I do agree there were damage in shipping. So the customer's asking for expedited shipping. Well, you've actually written it at that point and then it summarized it back. What I thought was interesting is it actually decided to provide expedited shipping in the answer. So it's like Is that a policy? How did generative AI know that you should do that just because the person asked for it? Is there a policy? Is there a procedure? Did it look up something with that retrieval augmented generation we talked about earlier to identify? It's like, oh, orders over $100 are high value customers. Do this. Orders for $2, don't expedite shipping for $15 on it. Like it just decided to complete the sentence, which it's supposed to do. That's his job,
Yeah,
and
and it was
include that.
correct. Yeah. Yeah, in English, it was correct. The business rules may or may not. So that was I mean, we obviously talk about that when, we talk about orchestration and, if the situation like that does arise, you can escalate to a person or, someone with authority to make that decision if the model doesn't support it, right? I mean, you could have a model that says, boom, go ahead. But if it's outside of, the boundaries, then ask a person and then,
Yep.
and then it trains itself. But
Yeah.
well, did you notice anything about privacy? Because one of the prompts for an executive was like, "Hey, I'm attending the board meeting, and here's the topics of the board meeting." That to me, that's insider information.
Yep.
That I mean, you're gonna put it inside your Gmail. Oh, by the way, the Google only works with Google Docs and Gmail, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So if you're using Microsoft, the prompts aren't going to work the same because they reference put this Google Doc in and
Yep.
Google Sheets and uh,
Yeah.
but one of the executive prompts was the prompt was here's our board topics. That's insider information. Any concern there?
Well, yeah. So you've actually brought up two different aspects that I think are important. One is, first off, you can include, say, a document. You can reference a Google document or an email, but so that means that you had to find it. You had to find the content to support the content section yourself. So it's like you had to go like, oh, there's 4,000 policy manuals. Great, let me go find the right one. Or we have 80 agendas because we do this meeting with the board every 3 weeks. Do we need to look at the last 3 agendas for action items, things like that? So you're doing all the finding of the information, and then I guess if you trust Google blindly, then if it's a Google Doc and the document's inside of there and it goes into Gemini hosted in Google, you're just kind of blindly trusting that they are going to protect your data. The trick is, like what happens if people are hit context and what if it's actually continuously learning and then wants to say, okay, this is now available for other people to prompt, right? There wasn't anything very clear of like, okay, once you start leaking documents in your Google Drives, are those available for anybody to see? How does that privacy work? They didn't really describe it in the manual. Microsoft and their Copilot stuff, they do kind of say, SharePoint generically. So you're assuming that your SharePoint security is inherited, but it actually wasn't called out, which is, interesting. Yeah. And, some companies are more cautious than others. Like, ooh, I don't know if I actually want that to go into another server that's not my server, if you will, in Gemini and a public server. So there's privacy concerns to think through. And the complication of you had to go find the right document to add it to the prompt.
Yeah.
That's not easy, right?
I mean, your SharePoint example, if I'm using Azure, the LLM is not inside my Azure. It's somewhere else, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's I don't have my own.
Yeah, you're crossing boundaries. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. So in terms of what people should do, right, based on role, so we'll eliminate the developers, right? We're not talking to them because that is a much more technical audience. But the business user, what should they do depending on let's call it they have, either the Microsoft suite, they're using Outlook and OneDrive and SharePoint, and then the Google clan, right? Everybody using G Suite.
Yeah. So I think the one thing that when we talk to people, it's like, okay, are you just trying to make one person 10% faster on their desktop? Because they're still having to do all the work and do it. It's just doing the spell checking, the formatting. So that's not going to save you 100% of your time or 50% of the time. It's an incremental add. So I think the thing is like, hey, this is important to understand, but think about how is this being applied to, okay, great, I've got 10%, but I have to train 150 people on using this, and not everybody's going to get it. Or do you think about, okay, the problem to be solved is some of these emails should actually be answered automatically. Like a human should not touch every email. But this concept with teaching you to be a prompt engineer means a human has to touch every email. And quite honestly, at 2 a.m, as someone calls in or sends an email in, if you will, to keep that example going, about an order where they opened it up and it was a damaged item, or it was like it's late, things like that. Well, obviously, with automation, the idea is extract the person from the email, cross-reference the order number to make sure it's the same person. And is there a business policy, retrieval augmented generation, to support this? Could you actually facilitate the return automatically, or reply back with an email and say, please let me know your options are, refund, or we'll send you a new one. But do it without a person having to touch everything. That's where you're going to get the value. So it's good to think about this, because you'll think about, wow, the software is doing some pretty complicated things for me, but you want the software to do it. So the mindset should be interesting. I don't know if I can teach everybody to be a prompt engineer. Some people, yes. And is this an incremental value, or did I actually eliminate so that the easy things the software does, and things that are very complex, like if it's a major customer and like their quarterly purchasing is $400,000. Okay, do you want to escalate to a person for a personal touch? Probably, right? You're not going to get rid of everybody in customer support, but look at what you're trying to do. You're not trying to make everybody 10% better. You're trying to get rid of the tasks and the medial stuff, and then let people do what people do best. That, because very relationship oriented emails, it may mean like you actually call them, right? Give the people the time to do that great job of customer relationship management versus, spending hopefully less time, but I don't know. I was looking at these prompts, so it'll probably take me longer to write the prompts than do it.
Yeah.
Do it with that.
I think that's an important point, right? Because especially in the easiest use case to realize is the one you're talking about with customer support, and it's basic pattern matching, right? The customer asks about this, oh, I do this, right? I mean, a machine can do that, but what a machine
Yeah.
can't do is basically remove itself from all the automation and be authentic with the customer, right? So I think customer service will get better because, we're going to remove the menial task. That means your turnover goes down. That means you have more tenured employees. That means they have more like experience, in being empathetic with the customer. I think it's just going to make things better by removing
Yep.
the bad stuff, right? And
Yep.
and that's what I mean, that's the way people need to look at it. But yeah, teaching someone to do all the prompting is, to me, it's just kicking the can down the road because
Yep.
you're gonna have a machine do this at some point, and don't waste your time teaching people how to use a thing that a machine should be using for you.
Yep. I agree.
All right. Well, good. Thanks, Chris. We'll include all the links to the prompting guides. You guys can take a look yourself. And if you need anything, contact us over at krista.ai. All right. Until next time.